Great. So here we are. Welcome, everyone. This is our Getting Started with Mindful Eating webinar. I'm Julie, the cancer dietitian, and I'm here with Jane Anderson, who is also a dietitian. And we have some information to share for you today. And let me pull up my slides here. So we are going to kind of have a conversation about this this evening. So we do welcome any of your questions. You can feel free to enter those in the Q&A. Just so you know about us, because it seems that everybody has an opinion about food, and they're not all expert opinions, and lots of people might think that they're experts, but I always encourage my clients to be sure that they're getting nutrition information from registered dietitians, as we have credentialed training. We have to go through 4 years of credentialed programs and an internship and pass an exam, and now there's a requirement for a master's. So we do try to stick to the most evidence-based nutrition information so that you can trust that we are giving you the science-based information you're looking for. So if you're not familiar with me, I am the Wellness Director for Cancer Services, and that is a nonprofit here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where I live. And I have worked for Cancer Services for almost 14 years now, and have developed cancerdietitian.com actually just prior to coming on staff. But Cancer Services does fund all of the website and the associated programs that go with it as part of our mission to enhance health, life, and survivorship. So that's how we're able to do these things at no charge to you. I am a registered dietitian, a licensed nutritionist, and a board certified specialist in oncology nutrition, which just means that oncology is my specialty. You all are probably very familiar with the website, cancerdietitian.com, but I did have a fun call from somebody today who was like, how did I get on this invite list? So we talked about that, but I do author cancerdietitian.com, and if you're on my email list, you get emails every time I write a new article or post something of interest. I do have social media pages and blah, blah, blah. I have a BS in biology from NC State, and my master's degree is from UNC Chapel Hill. So yes, you'll see in my bio, I mentioned my lively beagle, who is being kept quiet currently by my 11-year-old daughter. And my 4-year-old son's being kept quiet by my husband. So that's me. Jane Weiss is our guest tonight. So thank you, Jane, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. She's also a registered and licensed dietitian nutritionist here in North Carolina. She works at a private practice in town and works with adolescents, adults, and families to find peaceful relationships with food and to discover or rediscover eating to nourish the body and mind. So she also has her bachelor's degree in food science, nutrition, and health promotion from Mississippi State University, and did her dietetic internship at Tulane in New Orleans. And then she moved to Winston-Salem after doing her master's in public health in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So I have a mug here, the Starbucks from the Twin Cities, in honor of Jane, because we had our oncology conference there one year in the middle of the biggest snowstorm. So over the course of Jane's 10 years working in nutrition, she's served roles with the Food Corps, the Choctaw Indian Reservation, Second Harvest Food Bank, which is actually when I first met Jane. And she also has done employee well-being with Wake Forest Baptist Health. And through these experiences, she evolved her nutrition approach to integrate sound nutrition science with the principles of intuitive eating. And she currently works as a nutrition therapist for body and mind nutrition. So some of you who maybe have followed me for a while might be remember some classes that I had Deborah Benfield contracting to do around mindful eating for cancer survivors, who is also owns that practice that Jane works at. So she enjoys visiting new places, cooking and eating good food, and very slowly learning to play banjo and dog rearing, beagle rearing. So here is our plan for this evening. First of all, I plan for us to just talk about what the benefits of mindful eating are, so that you kind of understand why is it that we're even offering this webinar. How is mindful eating part of an overall kind of focus on mindfulness? What exactly is mindful eating and what is it not? And then how practically do you put that into practice? in your daily life. So we do welcome your questions as we go along. I will jump in and ask them if they're relevant to the topic, or we may save some of them for the end. We're just going to roll with it. So what else? Is there anything else I'm missing before we kind of get right into it?
I think that covers it.
Okay, so I'm basically kind of turning it over a little bit to Jane to give us information, but I will monitor the Q&A and I will probably jump in with questions because I always, when I have the opportunity to get the experts in here sharing with us, I love to ask the questions that come up for me that I know my clients are wondering about. So Jane, you're on, and just let me know if you need me to move slides in a different way.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, glad to be here, and I'm really happy to talk more about mindful eating. And I used to teach a lot of classes on intuitive eating. Julie knows this from working a lot with employees at a medical center, and I don't do that anymore. So I kind of miss that aspect of my job. I do a lot more individual counseling, and I do still incorporate a lot of mindful eating practices into my work now with individuals, but I think it's really nice to share this widely with how this can be really beneficial. So that is a good transition into what are the benefits of mindful eating? Why does it matter? Why do it? So there have been a lot of studies on definitely mindfulness and specifically with mindful eating. And we know that people who practice mindful eating, studies are a little limited with like following people long term, but we know that people have better digestion, better body satisfaction, greater psychological well-being. They tend to have improved eating behaviors, which is not a surprise. They're slowing down while eating and able to recognize fullness more quickly. And then, often feel satisfied with less food as a result. Feel more in control. There's also a lot of evidence that mindful eating helps with reducing binge eating and emotional eating. And that's believed to be from reducing guilt and shame around eating, which I'll talk more about. And then I think one of the best parts of this too is it increases pleasure while eating. Like we get more of a sensory experience from eating mindfully. So we can keep moving. And what is mindfulness? Because that might be new for some people to hear even mindfulness. And this is just an intentional focus on thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations in the present moment. John Kabat-Zinn is a mindfulness expert who's based in Massachusetts, and he defines it as paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. So a lot of awareness, not learning to, as this slide says, learning to not react, but just have awareness of situations and choices. So again, a key part of mindfulness is non-judgmental awareness. And how is mindful eating part of mindfulness? So mindfulness can actually be applied to a lot of different things. It could be applied to how we are moving our bodies, like noticing you feel really fatigued, you feel really sore, or you have really tight muscles, or, and those can be all non-judgmental feelings. And so mindful eating is just one element of mindfulness that, again, mindfulness can be applied to a whole lot of different areas of your life. And so eating is just one component of that. And the definition is using all of your physical and emotional senses to experience and enjoy the food choices you make.
I think something that often comes to mind, we're kind of going to get to this, I guess, in what mindful eating is not, but when you're talking about food choices and enjoying them, that's like all the choices, right?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that this will be something that we talk about with what mindful eating is not, but, and I always thought this was so interesting, but at the hospital that I worked in, there was a mindful station, and that doesn't really make sense to have a mindful station in the cafeteria for food, because it's not a specific food that's mindful, it's the practice of eating mindfully. So you can mindfully eat any kind of food, that having awareness non-judgmentally. It doesn't, just because something may seem healthy, that doesn't make it mindful. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I preempted that. Sorry.
So I guess expanding on this, or other ways to think about mindful eating, having gratitude for food, like actually really contemplating, and I'll talk more about this later too, but where food is coming from, what it's made of, and just for having it in general. And thinking about choices that will be satisfying and nourishing to the body. So, and I think, Julie, maybe this is what you're saying too, that there's foods that feel really nourishing in different ways and satisfying in different ways. So there's a lot of foods that hit the spot or feel really good to eat at different times of year, or have different types of comfort in them. And those can be nourishing in their own right and have different types of values within them. And becoming more aware of our patterns, our eating habits, that's part of mindful eating too. So it's really easy to just get into a routine where things just kind of repeat and their default, and we lose awareness of that. So mindful eating is kind of pulling consciousness back into what those choices are, what those habits have become. So mindful eating is not judging. So I said, emphasize that mindfulness, mindful eating is really surrounding non-judgment. So not judging eating choices or behaviors. And I think that this happens a lot for people who learn about mindful eating, and they do experience some guilt when they're not doing it. And I don't think that's the point. I think there should be some maybe just appreciation for moments where you can do it, but not getting into sort of a guilt cycle when you're not able to, because it's not practical to do all the time. So not judging eating choices or behaviors, not following any particular diet or healthy eating plan. So that's kind of like what I was saying before. I think that sometimes people feel like, I am really aware of everything I'm eating because I'm following this diet that's making me count all these things or measure all these things. And so that's got to be mindful eating. That may not really fall into the definition of it, because, is that truly non-judgmental? Because a lot of times those sort of diet plans can actually bring in a lot of judgment and shame, or feeling like you failed if you do something that's off of the plan or diet. So a lot of this, and I'll expand more, but is slowing down and using sensory experience.
So I was trying to think of some things that maybe we say, or we might hear other people say, that would indicate more of like a judgment type of call around food versus just being curious and open about it. So cheating, right? Like the idea that you would be cheating by eating certain foods would be judging that what you're eating is somehow not okay.
Yeah. Clean eating. That's another one I think about, with like,
or dirty.
Yeah.
If you're not eating clean, you're eating dirty, but that's not really possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So also not distracted eating or mindless eating. I think that's pretty familiar to anyone who's ever multitasked. You can relate to that. And then mindful eating is not a weight loss strategy. So I did mention before that one of the benefits is that people notice they get satisfied sooner, or they connect with that more, or feel maybe they discover fullness because they're starting to pay attention. So all of those things have been researched, but there's not strong evidence to support that this leads to weight loss. So I don't think it should be a weight loss strategy. And I think that's probably a good thing because there's a lot of distraction that occurs with focusing on weight loss that gets lost in the focus on feeling healthy, feeling well, and connecting with food, connecting with your body. So that being the focus drives a lot more fulfillment and like I said before, enjoyment in your food and body satisfaction than the distraction that might come from really focusing on weight loss. So
yeah, we got a good question in the Q&A that I think fits with kind of this topic, which is with all the noise out there, and there's granted like a lot of noise about what we should and should not be eating, and people who tell you, one thing that seems to completely contradict another, and where do you get your information? So they're asking, what can we do to increase our confidence that we're doing the right things for ourselves? Apart from staying away from Google and Twitter. Yeah, I mean, you do have to be intentional about where you're going to receive information, and recognizing, I think, some of those judgmental words as maybe you would stay away from that. Is that what you would say?
yeah, that's a great question. Because I do think that there's a lot of really fleeting headlines and noise that's out there, and that can lead you in a lot of different directions on what is the best thing to do, what is the right way to do this. And I think I read an article pretty recently that where someone kind of cut away the riffraff in eating and taking care of yourself with, like, if you really look at the nuts and bolts, like nothing's ever really changed in how we should basically take care of ourselves. And especially with eating, having regular meals and have snacks when you're hungry, and try to pay attention to having different components to a meal. So having maybe starch, vegetable, protein, and not trying to overcomplicate things. Variety adds a lot of different enjoyment and also different nutrients. But I do get that a lot, that there's so many different articles that make things confusing, and new products out there, different new sweeteners, or different news stories about some new study or some influencer who's trying something new. I actually, unfortunately, hear a lot about that through TikTok or things that teenagers I work with are seeing. And makes me feel pretty good when they're getting information from a TikTok influencer.
Yeah.
That's sarcasm.
Like, don't listen to celebrities for nutrition advice. That's my general rule for everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
The person was clarifying that it's easy to stumble across stuff that causes them to second guess their nutrition choices, which I totally get, because I think just the volume of information that's out there and people who present it as fact. So I agree with Jane. Like, I tend to encourage my clients to not worry so much about it in general, that it's pretty, like, nutrition is a science, and there's some things that we have to do very strategically around certain diseases. But for the most part, like with a lot of my clients who are either doing well in treatment or who are done with treatment, like, I would tell you, there's a wide variety of ways that you can nourish yourself that's perfectly healthy. And like, when you get variety of foods and you have some, like, you should have some really enjoyable, maybe things that you don't think of traditionally as nutritious, like, those are all very nourishing for our days. And so feeling confident that you don't have to have some kind of like perfect diet, as some people might say, like, you don't have to eat that way to nourish yourself. It's a very wide range of what our bodies, the ways that we can get the nutrients that we need. So sometimes you just have to remind yourself, like, oh yeah, it can be pretty common sense. And if you're reading something that sounds like it's not very common sense, or it's really like specific, or you're not allowed to eat certain things, or those those types of things, I just go ahead and push to the side. Like, this isn't practical, nor is evidence suggest you have to do that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, good
um,
point.
someone else was trying to clarify around the judgmental thing,
Mhm.
which I also find it's hard to figure out. So they're asking, is judgment associated with shame? Like, is that the connection we're trying to stay away from? Because they're trying to see the difference between judging versus just being like discerning and thoughtful or mindful.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a good question too. I think of judging as being like, oh, I shouldn't have eaten that. I can't believe that I had a brownie after dinner and I had like, pasta for dinner or something like those kind of thoughts. That's like, those are observations, but they're super judgmental.
So
Versus,
feeling bad or good even about,
yeah, I now talk about that in the steps of mindful
okay,
eating, but I think of the non-judgment being like, everyone has this inner voice that can be their worst critic, and going back to general mindfulness, that might be like, oh, that was a stupid thing to say, or those kind of things, versus like non-judgmentally is like, I said that, maybe that wasn't the best choice of words. uh Practicing a little more like neutrality, awareness, like not such like harsh judgment around things, and that takes a lot of practice. If you especially have had that strong kind of inner critic, or some people call the food police, like inside your head, that's making a lot of those cause
or
harm.
inside your house. Like, I
Yeah,
think for
that's
some
true.
people,
Oh,
it's like a
yeah.
voice of somebody else,
Uh-huh.
that they're hearing. Like, they've always been taught, like,
Mhm.
you shouldn't eat whatever. Um, so then they just internalize it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so yeah, well, there's another question that I think we're going to be able to answer. So I won't slow you down anymore.
I love the questions. Oh, yeah. So how do you practice mindful eating? Okay, we'll go through 5 different kinds of steps, and there are so many. I love Julie's choices of pictures in here. There's so many different, maybe specific ways that other people would give for mindfully eating, but I'll just give a handful. But number 1 would just be practicing slowing down, and that's something we're going to do at the end. Oh, I
I
think that
know. I realized we forgot to tell people to get a raisin. Do not get up and get a raisin now. I will give you, or something else. Doesn't have to be a raisin. Don't worry about it. Anyway, we'll give you a minute.
I have
I've
chocolate
decided
bar
already. When we get to the practicing the slowing down the eating, we have an activity for you, and I'll give you some time to go get something. So don't worry about it.
Okay, so we will practice that later, but first thing is really slowing down and really embracing the whole sensory experience. So visually taking in your food and smelling it, noticing the texture of it, and maybe how it looks on your plate and the smell. And then as you're eating, slowing down to give your body enough time to connect with your mind and to speak to each other. So I know I said before, and this is probably the biggest pushback. I've mentioned this to Julie before, where people learn about mindful eating and hear this like slowing down so much, and listening to all these different sensory feedback points while they're eating and also within their body. And who has time for that? So that may not be possible all the time, but if you can do that for the first bite of your meal or your snack, or maybe it's 5 minutes every other day, or something like that. But it's a practice. It's like anything else. And a lot of this, the point is examining your habits and patterns, and not expecting for them to all be reinvented suddenly. So first thing, slow
So
down.
something like, do you ever have people assess like how quickly they normally eat?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something, either people have a lot of awareness around, that they worked in healthcare or do work in healthcare, or some job where they are really rewarded in a way for eating as quickly as possible. And, or maybe they just have always been told you're a really fast eater or slow eater. Or there's a lot of people who tend to eat many meals by themselves and they don't really know. Like I don't know if I eat quickly or slowly. So yeah, I think your question was about people who feel like they.
Yeah, I was just thinking like if you're not even sure you're ready to slow down or you're not sure it's necessary, that maybe a first step would be just to sort of see how quickly you eat. Because
Yeah.
I think a lot of, like you mentioned, the habits are just like natural things that we do. We don't even realize it. And
Mhm.
so before you even change something, you could just assess where you currently are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the raisin meditation, which we will do later, helps with that. Like so what is it like to really like slow down and notice all these things in a
Mhm.
bite of food? And that I think that can kind of illuminate where you're at. Like, whoa, I never thought about noticing all these things. Yeah. So second strategy for mindful eating is getting to know, understanding what does hunger and fullness sound like, feel like? What are those cues indicating, or what does that usually feel like for you? This is a little different for everyone. So teenagers that I meet with, I'll sometimes ask them like, what do you think of with hunger? And they kind of look at me like I'm crazy, like the obvious, like my stomach's growling. But that isn't something that everyone experiences. Some people get a headache or they feel kind of fatigued. Like hunger isn't always something that presents in their stomach all the time. But for a lot of people it is. And so a lot of mindfulness is external, looking at your food and really taking in the smells and where this food has come from, being grateful for it. But a lot of it is internal too, and really thinking about what are cues that are coming from your body, and kind of signaling that internal, like what's happening in your mind too, the satisfaction that comes from the food or meal. So this might be a good time to switch over to the handout, Julie, the hunger fullness. It is that one, satiety cues description. So this is from an intuitive eating resource, and that's an approach that I teach a lot and try to coach people on from wherever they're starting from. And so this is pretty widely available if you look for, and I think you're going to post it on the
Yeah.
website.
When I send out the recording and the follow-up email, I'll have it with that.
Okay. So this is just a way to think about how hunger feels, and that it can help with that non-judgmental kind of approach, more objective kind of thinking about where am I from hunger to fullness on a scale of 0 to 10. And in knowing, pretty objectively, feeling 0 or 1 hunger level is unpleasant for most people, for everyone. That should be pretty uncomfortable. You're ravenous, irritable, anxious to eat. It's kind of painful. That's called primal hunger. And that feels urgent. Like I really need to eat. And so this is really helpful to begin to understand as you're learning to eat mindfully, slowing down to understand this. Another recommendation for eating mindfully is to try not to ever skip meals, because that can make it a lot more difficult to slow down if you're so hungry. Like it doesn't matter. I'll eat whatever is available to me because I'm past the point of caring or mindfully choosing something. So trying not to get to that point. And being in this kind of 3 to 7 range is more comfortable. Like it's kind of a pleasant hunger. I'm ready to eat. I'm looking forward to it. It's not urgent, but this chart says it's a polite hunger.
I was just laughing at
not hungry.
It's so polite. It's like a hungry. That's like, hey, would you mind if we ate a little bit soon?
Yeah, exactly. So that's something that I think is is really good to think about. And a lot of times this is uh, a, a tip I give to parents with, like, creating some structure around meals. Like, you do want kids to come to a meal kind of hungry. They shouldn't be starving, but they're more likely to, you're not going to battle them over anything if they're a little bit hungry. So that pleasant feeling is a good thing. And then working up to, like, just feeling neutral, neither hungry or full, or beginning to notice fullness. That's still neutral, and it's pleasant to feel comfortable, content, satisfaction, fullness. Like, that should feel like a good thing. I think a lot of times that feels scary to people, or different diets have made that really intimidating, that you should always finish before you're full, just when you're neither hungry or full. But I think that can actually lead a lot of people to feel always sort of deprived if they're never quite content from the meal. So that's this like 7 out of 10 range is a comfortable place. And then it is, of course, possible to go beyond that and feel like this is not quite pleasant. I don't feel maybe like uncomfortable, but I'm a little overly full, and then very full and painfully full, stuffed. Like, it's a distraction, just like painful hunger was. Like, this painful fullness is kind of hard to deal with. That is obviously unpleasant. So getting in tune with what these things feel like for you can be really helpful for tuning in to that awareness and mindful internal part of mindful eating. And
So am I switching back to here?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
With this tip, do you use that scale? Like, do you have people do that regularly, like at every meal, or how often do they check in?
Yeah, I have a lot of clients who do that for every meal and snack. They'll as they're learning to understand what that feels like, and also maybe how it affects, like, I was at a 0 here and I was really hungry, or like starting this meal, I was actually like already at a 7. I wasn't really hungry. And so it can just give this extra pause, like this extra tool to use to access that, and kind of allow you to identify and name, like, I think I'm kind of at like a 7 or 8 out of 10 for fullness. And that is probably not something you're going to say out loud, but maybe in your head. And that sounds a lot more non-judgmental, right? Than like, oh, I shouldn't have eaten so much, and like really spending a lot of time in guilt around that, or shame, or feeling the need to grieve over it almost. But another thing that I like to remind people of is all of those sensations are really normal human experiences. So reminding yourself of that and not getting caught up in all the guilt, because that can kind of lead to, it's not really productive to sit with guilt in that, versus if you're mindful, then you just may observe that was a really great meal. I don't normally eat with those people, and I think I just got kind of caught up in the conversation, and time went by and I ate a little more than I meant to, and maybe it would have helped if I'd slowed down some, but it's not a big deal. This happens to everyone. And I learned something from that. So
I think so for people who are either in the middle of cancer treatment, or like appetite issues are challenging, especially during treatment, and kind of linger for some people. And I think this is the hardest part for me with our clients and figuring out, like, how much, because sometimes we need them to eat even if they don't feel hungry, so they're overriding a little bit of their sort of fullness cues. But I think that actually paying attention to like how full you are could also help your medical team to understand, like, okay, you really are feeling really full with almost no food. Like, maybe we need to do some kind of intervention to try to help your stomach empty quicker, or to increase your appetite. So I think that this tool is useful in a variety of ways around mindful eating, but also potentially just around being more aware Like if you do feel full all the time, how full do you feel? Do you ever feel hungry? You know, so that you have a scale of kind of, oh, okay, where am I? So
Yeah, that's a really good point. Um, and the final thing that I listed here is there are different types of hunger. So what I mean by that is there's emotional hunger. I think that a lot of people can relate to that, where it's maybe not necessarily feeling like stomach hunger, like I'm noticing my stomach feels empty, but I just want something to eat, or something comforting or familiar, warm, whatever that may be. And maybe just distinguishing that non-judgmentally, and noticing like I actually don't feel like that would make me feel better at all by having something to eat. Or I think it would help me to feel better to have like a hot cup of tea and a cookie. And even though I'm not really hungry, but that sounds nice to me right now. And then other types of hunger might be like you've just watched a whole cooking show and this person cooked a delicious chicken and all of these things. And it's like all the visuals, and you really want some food because you just watched this, or hearing someone opening up like a bag of chips or chewing on or popcorn popping, like that ear
smelling the
hunger.
popcorn in your
Yeah,
office.
yeah. Nose hunger, like noticing, is the desire for food coming from your stomach, or is it more so from these different sensory experiences? And it may not change the outcome. Like you may still go have some popcorn, but you have this awareness of like, well, I'm not really that hungry. So it may change how much you do have of it, because you have this greater insight into what's going on. Yeah. And another component of mindful eating, another strategy, is slowing down to really connect with your food, whether that be thinking about like where it may have been grown, whether you got that at the farmer's market, or maybe just from the strawberries in January, and that's from not somewhere around here, but that's okay. It's winter, and you just give some thought to that. And what is something made of, or maybe, connecting more with food as you're preparing it. And that might even be, you're just warming something, but you are still like spending a little bit more time considering like what's in something. And what's the different components and who may have made it, and all of those kinds of things. So this is probably pretty obvious, but mindful eating is focusing purely on eating. So really being able to slow down again enough to stop the other task you might be doing. And because you can't exactly focus on all the whole sensory experience and what's going on inside your body, and also the satisfaction that may come mentally from or emotionally from having a certain type of food. That requires a lot of energy and thought, and it's really hard to dedicate that amount of energy to it if you're doing several other things at once. And also, having several other things going on just makes it easier to not notice all those things, like the maybe that even just like the texture of food, or how much you were even actually enjoying it. Because sometimes people really like, they start to slow down and eat something mindfully, and it may be a food that they thought that they've loved, or that they maybe they just eat it all the time because it's easy and available, but they start to notice like, this isn't even really that good. I've just been eating this because it's available to me. Or it could be the opposite, where something that's been taken for granted, you really notice like, wow, I'm going to really take my time and savor this and only focus on this, because I know that doing other things will detract from the satisfaction of eating this. Yeah, which is the satisfied guy here.
Mr. Satisfaction.
So I think this is the final strategy that I listed here, but really considering what does satisfaction feel like, because that's different than fullness. Fullness is more of a physical content feeling. Satisfaction you can have from having a piece of chocolate. Oh, that was a really good piece of chocolate, but you're not full from that. Or you might have this huge salad that you're full from, but you're not satisfied at all.
Mm.
So really thinking about like, what does satisfaction feel like? And knowing the difference between, like, we may believe that like I'm satisfied from the salad or this plate full of vegetables that I had. And that's really just something we've convinced ourselves, like, yes, this was satisfying to me, but truly you're hungry, not that much longer, or you're still kind of thinking about like, what else can I eat? And those are sort of signs that you may not be totally satisfied from that food or meal. And so really having that true experience of like the sensory experience and listening to your body, that can contribute to all those observations that come with satisfaction.
So a couple of questions that I think are good. They're very practical around how to practice mindful eating. Is it okay to go out to eat and make mindful choices, or is it better to cook at home?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think that, I think anytime you introduce different distractions, it's a little harder to eat mindfully when it's a new practice, because let's say you've like tried this once or twice, and then you eat with friends, and there's a lot of like you haven't seen in a while, and maybe there's like a potluck and there's all kinds of different foods you want to try, and it's just a little bit harder to tune into that, but that's certainly not impossible. And the same thing for like eating out at a restaurant. Certainly you can go back to that kind of hunger and fullness scale and think about how you're feeling and look at the menu and contemplate like what sounds the most satisfying. And a lot of people really master this, and they can slow down enough to just like picture what this meal is going to look like coming out, and what is this going to taste like? Is this going to be warm or cold? And imagining those things and what sounds the most satisfying to them. But I mean, if you're out with a group of people, that's a whole lot of dialogue in your head that you may or may not have the opportunity to do, but it's part of the practice.
Yeah, I guess it probably just depends on your situation. I think you can eat mindfully at home where you cook it yourself. You can eat mindfully if you heat up a microwave meal. You can eat mindfully probably even if you go to the drive-through and you sit in your car and eat.
Oh,
And you
yeah.
can eat mindfully if you sit down at a restaurant table.
Mhm.
It's about your intention
Mhm.
and are you doing that? I think for me, sometimes it's like eating at home is really stressful because everybody's,
Mhm.
hungry, or I'm hungry and I'm getting home from work, and like that whole environment's very stressful. So like going out to eat it allows for a little bit more mindfulness. Like there's longer time for me to like figure out where we want to go to eat based on, what I want. And when we get there, then like, oh, look at all these options that I don't have to cook, so like, and
Yeah.
that's, to me, that's very exciting.
Mhm.
And it feels like there's more choices to be made than if I'm at home and I'm just trying to figure out what we can eat out of what there is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but some people love to cook, love to meal plan. Like I have a friend, it's her favorite thing is to sit down and plan a meal. Like for the first year of the pandemic, her family didn't eat the same food twice because this was her thing. It's like meal
Oh.
planning and preparing different foods. So for her, like going out to eat is probably not going to be very much fun or mindful because she enjoys the other pieces. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That's very circumstantial, because like I really enjoy cooking, and I tend to see that as like a winding down. I tend to have a lot of like heavy work that I'm doing because I work primarily with eating disorders, and so for me like cooking is like a much more um there's more that I can control and I can anticipate, and that and so yeah, I like that, the sensory experience I get from it. It's a little more calming. I don't have young children running around. So I can see how that would be more challenging to do that. And yeah, versus like maybe going to um, a restaurant but it can be done anywhere,
Yeah.
definitely.
And even people in treatment who have like taste changes, things don't taste the same. I think like this is also an opportunity to be more aware as to like, oh, this doesn't taste right. Like, what about it am I tasting or not tasting? Like, what am I expecting that I'm not getting?
Mhm.
So someone did ask if you're sharing a meal. So you kind of mentioned if there's other people you're eating with, that's a little distracting.
Mhm.
So does single tasking apply like when you're eating with others, I guess?
I think that's I think that's inevitable, that you're going to be eating with other people, but that's an example of having this awareness with mindfulness that's just like, maybe this is a really loud person with a big personality who talks a whole lot, and you just kind of know what you're getting into, and have some like, how is this going to affect me? Or maybe this, because this person talks a whole lot, I'm going to have the ability to like actually really tune in to what I'm eating.
Maybe it
Or
depends what they're talking about.
yeah, that's true.
And then
But
it might stress you out.
yeah. So I don't think single tasking necessarily applies to eating with other people, because I think a lot of times, and this really depends on the other people that you're eating with, but you might be sharing a meal with someone else who can join with you in the like real like noticing all these things and the awareness and appreciation of the meal, or it may be someone who just like scarfs down food and you're feeling really influenced by that. I know I tend to be a naturally slow eater, and if I'm around someone else eating quickly, it makes me feel like rushed. So
It
I
does.
have to.
My brother, it's so funny because like sometimes my brother, when I grew up, or I don't remember when, but I was like, you're making me nervous. You're
Yeah.
eating so fast. You're making me nervous. Like it's just, yeah,
Mhm.
raising up
Oh,
your
yeah, it's not a
anxiety
race.
level. It's
Yeah.
not a race.
Mhm. Or yeah, then there you may notice you're around a person who is like, you're like watching them eat for 20 minutes because they're such a slow eater and they're like talking a lot. So maybe just kind of having awareness around those things too.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the moment in time where we ask you, it's a raisin meditation. I don't spend a lot of time with mindful eating, but it's funny because whenever I have friends who are like, oh, do you do mindfulness? And it's always the raisin. I don't know why the raisin is always the choice food for mindful eating, but like it is for some reason. So I have my raisins here. So we want to give you a little time. For those of you, if you don't have a raisin, it doesn't matter. Just like get anything. You can mindfully eat anything. I had Girl Scout cookies delivered this week,
Oh,
so you could
I
mindfully
had
eat a
I
cookie.
have some dark chocolate almonds, but I had
There
some
you
Girl
go.
Scout cookies were an option that I was considering. I think that,
uh,
so are we going to give people a minute or so to get?
yes. So I have a little timer going.
Okay.
So hopefully people are running off and grabbing their raisin or whatever food item, or maybe they're eating dinner and they can pay
Yeah.
attention to a bite of food.
Mhm. I think the raisin gets used because it's like it changes some, like the
Mm.
chewy, like it softens, and there's just like a lot to notice about it. Um, but
Yeah, it doesn't disappear in your mouth real fast either.
yeah,
Like
exactly. Hmm. Yeah,
something
but
can melt in
chocolate
your
is like
mouth.
a piece of chocolate's pretty good too. But yeah, sometimes if you're like you hold a raisin for a while, this
Yeah,
part that can melt with.
I have oh, I don't want to start about my raisins, but my raisins are real dry.
That's what I had a friend one time who was in a situation where this was a practice, and all she could think about was how dry the raisin was.
I mean, I buy things from Costco, so I have no idea how long these raisins have been in my pantry. So anyway, I will notice that. Okay, people, it's been a whole minute. Hopefully you've grabbed whatever it is that you're going to eat mindfully, and Jane's going to walk us through.
Yeah. So this is very widely available online. And if you just Google the raisin meditation, it should be pretty easy to find this if you do want to go back and practice different components or elements or slowing down with eating. And this is really just an application of what all we've talked about today, slowing down to eat a food. And so we'll go ahead and get started. Whatever food you've chosen, we'll start with holding it. So take this food, if it is a raisin or whatever it may be, and hold it in the palm of your hand or between your finger and thumb. Take time to really focus on it. Gaze at the raisin or whatever food it is with care and full attention. Imagine that you've dropped in from Mars and you've never seen an object like this before in your life. Let your eyes explore every part of it, examining the highlights where the light shines, the darker hollows, the folds and ridges, and any asymmetries or unique features. Next, touch the raisin or the food. Turn it over between your fingers, explore the texture. Maybe do this with your eyes closed if that enhances your sense of touch. Hold the raisin or the piece of food beneath your nose. With each inhalation, take in any smell, aroma, or fragrance that may arise. As you do this, notice anything interesting that may be happening in your mouth or your stomach, or thoughts that are coming up. Next, place the piece of food or the raisin up to your lips. Slowly bring this up to your lips. Notice how your hand and arm know exactly how and where to position it. Gently place the raisin in your mouth. Without chewing, notice how it gets into your mouth in the first place. Spend a few moments focusing on the sensations of having it in your mouth, exploring it with your tongue. Next, taste the raisin. When you're ready, prepare to chew it, noticing how and where it needs to be for chewing. Then very consciously take 1 or 2 bites into it and notice what happens in the aftermath. It's experiencing any waves of taste that emanate from it as you continue chewing. Without swallowing yet, notice the bare sensations of taste and texture in your mouth and how these may change over time, moment by moment. Also pay attention to any changes in the object itself. When you feel ready to swallow the raisin, see if you can first detect the intention to swallow as it comes up, so that even this is experienced consciously before you actually swallow the raisin. Finally, you can see if you can feel what's left of the raisin moving down into your stomach and sense how that feels. So I think, oh, okay. I was like, my page got cut off. Sense how your body as a whole is feeling after you've completed this exercise. And that's the raisin meditation. So has anybody ever eaten a raisin that slowly?
That took about like 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and that's why this is like a meditation. It's really like slowing down and noticing so much, where that's not total. This is an example of how to mindfully eat, but not the expectation for all the time that you're even thinking about, like, it is interesting to consider, like, wow, the motions that we don't even consider at all with pouring like cereal into a bowl. This just happens that, these things just kind of occur. And I didn't even think about it. And in putting, like, I always think about, at a Mexican restaurant, the chips, it's just like an automatic default kind of motion. And then the same for, like, how we just chew and we don't even think about that. So just spending time kind of slowing down to notice those things, along with all the sensory experience too.
Yeah, I'd be interested if you, for the people who are on, if you want to put in the chat anything you noticed during that time. I think something that one of the questions that stood out to me is like, I've never thought of that before, is like, where does the raisin have to go when you start chewing? And I'm like, I don't know if I've ever noticed like the first place that my food goes when I
Mm.
start chewing. So that was something that I noticed.
Yeah. Yeah. If you ever have like tooth or mouth, things going on, that really increases your mindfulness a lot too, because you really appreciate when that's not there and not bothering you, but that can draw a lot more attention into like, I can only chew on one side of my mouth, or maybe it's like a sore throat, and noticing how you
Mm.
maybe take for granted, like this hurts to swallow. I can only, like, cold things only feel nice. Or
Yeah, for people in treatment, the mouth sores, I think, are a big thing. Burned throat from
Mm.
radiation or like chemo causing mouth sores, those are things that I didn't always really pay attention to. And then one time I, burned my mouth on something hot, and I was eating a strawberry. And I was like, goodness, this strawberry is so scratchy, because my mouth was raw, and it just had me thinking about, oh, people who are, they have like sore mouth because of treatment. Like, you would
Mhm.
never realize a strawberry was so scratchy until,
Mhm.
your, I guess, the state of your mouth or your digestive system is changed in a way where you might notice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Someone's commented they used a pear. So notice the liquid forming, chewing slowly before swallowing it. Um, didn't have raisins. Good for you, because I'm going to have to say raisins are not my favorite food. But maybe that's another good reason to eat it mindfully, because I was not in. There was a lot more to notice.
Mm.
um, so a couple of questions, that at least one question that came in beforehand about like someone who's following a keto diet and wants to know, can they eat, how do you eat mindfully on a keto diet? So I think that one's a little hard, because we would say, like we've talked about, that mindful eating is sort of not judging food. And when you're on diets with like not allowed and allowed foods, then you're automatically kind of judging them. So, but do you have other thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are two different things, that like eating mindfully, of course, like whatever's in front of you, you can slow down
Mhm.
enough to consider where this came from and appreciating it, and noticing all these things about how your body feels. Um, I think kind of examining what those limitations maybe that could be, and what's that based off of, like, is that because of a food allergy, or because of some disease state like diabetes that's affecting foods that you, or celiac disease, or something like that affected your food choices, or it's just like arbitrary, a diet that's limiting you in different ways. That's probably going to, um, I don't know, kind of have some friction with, like, as you're noticing these things about satisfaction and what you're feeling and nourishment, that you may notice things like, I miss this food, or
Mhm.
like or with mindful eating, you may develop like, less judgment with allowing that dessert, or allowing this like piece of bread with your meal that previously has been so off limits, or judged, or a lot of guilt surrounding that. But with eating mindfully, you may be able to slow down enough to notice more and notice how you're feeling. And maybe you don't want the whole piece of bread, or maybe you really savor it because it is so good. And yeah, so I guess the takeaway there is just like, there may be some thoughts that kind of come up from eating mindfully that could be positive, with seeing how limiting different foods, not based on an intolerance or allergy or some other reason like that that's going to have this like effect on you, then that can just lead to maybe feeling undersatisfied.
Yeah, I think that's a good, like, I think paying more attention can help you sort of see where it may or may not be meeting your needs.
Mm-hmm.
Another question that just came to my mind, because it seems like a lot of people are, or maybe this is part of like a current fad, is just the intermittent like fasting. How do you see that influencing people's hunger and fullness cues?
uh, yeah, that's a tricky one, because that sometimes is encouraged by different providers, that they've read some article about it and encourage
Just
their
for the record, I
people.
don't recommend it.
Yeah.
Jane, do you recommend it?
No, I don't.
Neither of us really recommend that. So,
Yeah.
but we know that, somebody else may have, or somebody might be trying it. And
yeah. So intermittent fasting is just deciding, and it can be defined a lot of different ways, but maybe like, I'm going to start eating at 11 and I'm going to stop at 7. And that decision, to do that is not taking into account like your actual cues. So you may wake up and you're like, oh, I'm actually really hungry, but I'm not going to have food until later. And then you get into this primal hunger state, or it kind of throws off the rest of the day, or you're really hungry before bedtime and you don't sleep as well because you're thinking about food. And so, just having like this mindfulness around, maybe it is like 9 o'clock and you usually go to bed around 10 and you are hungry, and you just give yourself that opportunity to ask, like, I could probably have a snack. Like, what would be something that maybe isn't going to give me indigestion right before I go to bed, but is not going to make me, or I won't be hungry either. And coming up with something like that. So that's a little more thoughtfulness that goes into that versus just like this hard cutoff time based on, what is it really based on?
yeah, I just really feel like people shouldn't ignore their hunger cues. So if, like, for the most part, that's like a normal pattern for you, whatever somebody's, daily eating pattern, and it seems like, oh, okay, you're done at 7 because that's kind of your routine. But if there's a day you're hungry, then I don't know, I just really feel like respecting your body's need for nourishment is important. And it might also help you see, like, oh, I wonder what I ate that was different today, or was my activity level different, or why is it that I'm, hungry at 9 o'clock when most days I'm not. So it can open up curiosity but I'm not a fan of hard, cutoffs.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's interesting because for most people who have some routine, like that kind of happens naturally, that you wake up around the same time and you usually have your breakfast like around, this time, and then, typically have dinner. But giving life is not cut and dry. So giving yourself some flexibility to move within that is important.
Yeah. I think, let's see. Um, Someone's asking, what are your thoughts on plant-based eating? So I will say that evidence suggests a plant-based diet is important and healthy. And I will also say that doesn't mean you can't have meat. So like in the circles of recommending plant-based eating, meat and dairy can have a place on the plate. It just means that you eat mostly plants. But if someone were to want to not eat meat or dairy for like religious reasons or ethical reasons, or just because they like vegetarian food, that's also like a fine choice. That's what I tell my clients, is that there's that wide range. You can be a meat eater, you could not be a meat eater. What plant-based means is that you eat mostly plants, but you can eat mostly plants and include meat. So what are your thoughts?
I would agree with that. It's interesting to me because I think that that's sort of interpreted different ways for people. Like they
Yeah,
see
for
it.
some people it's code for vegan.
Yeah. But having, I don't know, more of like a focus on beans and vegetables and nuts and seeds and things that maybe tofu or things like that, that would be more plant-based. But I agree. I think that can look different for different people. And
so I'll put a plug for my plant-based diets for cancer survivors webinar. There you go. On my website. You can watch it anytime. I can keep you company for an hour.
Yeah, it is something that is a kind of a commonality with mindful eating, that there's like a lot of like I think gravitation toward plant-based foods, like meaning like eating with the seasons and having maybe more like root vegetables in the winter, or things that are have maybe been like pickled or those kind of things, and then lots of like fresh greens. I feel like that's still growing here to some degree. And so there is this sort of thoughtfulness, around like how you're eating and how that feels, and noticing like sometimes you want something fresh, or maybe sometimes you want foods that are stewed or cooked, and those kinds of things.
So someone asked, do different types of foods give us different fullness cues?
Yeah.
Which is an interesting.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so there's foods that are going to be higher in foods that have fiber in them, like fruits and vegetables and beans. Those do contribute more to fullness. And then also foods that have protein and fat in them tend to sustain longer, so you feel full longer. It takes longer for the body to break that down than just carbohydrates. So yeah, that is a really good point. I probably should have brought that up, that may be something that you notice in eating mindfully, when you're including like those different kind of components in a meal, that you notice fullness more than just having like crackers. If you sat down and only had like some crackers and fruit at a meal, that probably wouldn't, it'd take a fair amount of that to feel full off of it, versus like having some protein and fat included in the meal too.
Yeah, I think something that I've noticed, like if I eat out for lunch and it's a meal that's going to have like more food in general, more fat, more protein probably, and then I don't get hungry at like my normal sort of hungry time. So I think that as you all experience being more mindful and paying more attention, then you will kind of answer your own questions. Like, what makes you feel fuller longer. You'll just notice that.
Yeah, that's a good example of like breaking from your maybe typical routine. You notice that.
Or even breakfast. I notice like if I'm in the mood and I make like toast with cheese and egg, like that is going to last me longer than if I have cereal for breakfast. And I'm not saying that either one is better or worse. I'm just saying that I do notice like, oh, like I'm hungry sooner. So I just eat again.
Yeah.
Someone asked about boosting hemoglobin while eating a plant-based diet. So I want to differentiate, like plant-based diet is just pretty much any type of eating that has plenty of plants in it, versus a vegan diet where there's no animal products at all. So I think it would be hard. Hemoglobin, there's a lot of things that influence that. So if somebody's in treatment or, and their hemoglobin's low, sometimes what you eat is not going to raise that or make a difference. Like you need intervention medically. Now, if we're just talking about kind of iron, It is harder to get more bioavailable iron if you're on a vegan diet, but you can. So anyway, that's my answer to that. I don't know, Jane, if you have.
No, that sounded great.
And someone put in a plug for my black bean chili. There you go. They're making my black bean chili for their family, which is a vegetarian chili. Although if you wanted to, you could add whatever meat to it if you want, but it is delicious. I will say that. I think that's pretty much it, but we did have a quote to kind of end our session with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's your suggested quote. So
yeah. Mindful eating
share with us.
replaces self-criticism with self-nurturing. It replaces shame with respect for your own inner wisdom. So I think that's the takeaway, that slowing down to like see eating as nurturing your body and your health. And that's not eating isn't an opportunity to criticize yourself. And it's actually like an opportunity to see what your own inner wisdom is and how much of that you have. And that may take some time and practice to reconnect to it, but replacing the shame that may be there with like this respect for what your body can do and tell you, and feel really fulfilled from that.
Awesome. Well, hopefully that was helpful for everybody. We appreciate you joining with us today, and I will send out copies of the slides and also those handouts that Jane mentioned, and we'll send the recording out as well. So we so much appreciate your time, and thank you, Jane, for sharing all this expertise with us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks everybody for being here.
All right, we're going to sign off. We'll see you later.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.